Good morning. Welcome to today's Northfield City Council Candidate Forum, sponsored by the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce and our media partners, KYMN Radio and the Northfield News. I am Todd Bornhauser, President of the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce and Tourism, and will be one of today's moderators. Joining me this morning is Terry Knight, news editor for KYMN Radio, and Chad Yelming, general manager of the Northfield News. The timekeepers for today's forum will be Lindsay Reddy and Lisa Peterson of the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce. I'd now like to introduce each City Council candidate for 2016. First, Mr. Greg Colby is seeking the at-large council position. Mr. Colby is a former City Council member. Greg is an attorney and instructor at Inver Hills Community College. Next, we have Ms. Erica Zweifel, who is the current Ward 3 Council member. Ms. Zweifel was elected in 2008 and re-elected in 2012. Erica is a project manager for the science department at Carleton College. Next, we have Mr. Jack Hoschauer, who is seeking the Ward 2 Council position. Jack previously served as chair of the EDA. Mr. Hoschauer is a former German instructor at St. Olaf College. Next is Mr. Brad Nest, who is seeking the at-large council position. Mr. Nest served as chair of the Northfield Convention and Visitor Bureau. Brad is currently an independent insurance agent working for Prior Lake Insurance. Next, we have Mr. Norman Butler, who is seeking the Ward 3 council position. Mr. Butler previously ran for City Council in 2010. Norman currently owns and manages the Contented Cow and Chapati. Finally, Mr. David DeLong is the current Ward 2 City Council member, and David was invited to participate in today's forum but was unable to attend. The format of today's forum will be as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for introductions and opening remarks. Then each candidate will receive 90 seconds to respond to each question. Finally, each candidate will receive 2 minutes for wrap-up and closing remarks. The moderators will take turns asking questions. The chamber staff determine the order of the candidates. Are there any questions? If not, we'll get started. Mr. Colby, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Well, thank you. My name is Greg Colby. I am running for the at-large position for the Northfield City Council. I want to thank KYMN, Northfield News, and the Northfield Area Chamber of Commerce for holding this forum. I think these kinds of things are very helpful. The reason I'm running, I'm a retired lawyer. I only work part-time at Inver Hills as an instructor in the paralegal program, and I have a fair amount of time and a great deal of interest. I would like to do a number of things. I'd like to promote civility on the City Council. One of the things that 33 years doing trial work teaches you is that you need to be respectful of the opposition, regardless of what they may be saying, regardless of who it might be. I would like to see the downtown of Northfield preserved, promoted, enriched. It is the centerpiece of our community. When people come to Northfield, they don't do it to visit South Highway 3. They come to visit our downtown, to visit our colleges, to visit this remarkable river that flows through our community. I would like to see Northfield connected to the Milltown Trail system. We need to regionalize, there's no question. Finally, I would like to improve upon our successes and follow the processes that we have seen over the last several years, where we can be proud of the projects in which we are involved, as exemplified by the Northfield Library renovation, which I think has been fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zweifel, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you. I would also like to thank our sponsors, the Northfield Area Chamber, KYMN Radio, and the Northfield News, as well as our attendees and viewers online. Thank you very much for attending. I'm honored to be Northfield's Ward 3 City Councilor and have served in that capacity since 2009. I'm employed at Carleton College's Science Education Resource Center, where I am a project manager, and I'm also the assistant director of the National Association of Geoscience Teachers. I serve on Northfield's Housing and Redevelopment Authority and the Milltowns Trail Joint Powers Board, and have served on the regional Northfield Area Fire Service Exploratory Committee. I have participated in the Blandon Community Leadership Program and the Greater Northfield Sustainability Coalition. Northfield is a great place to live. We enjoy a vibrant downtown, an engaged community, and a robust economy. We have garnered awards for Best Place to Retire, Safest College Town, and Top 10 Small Town. We are home to Northfield's favorite library. In my next term as City Councilor, I look forward to continuing the tradition of greatness. I will work to maintain the infrastructure that makes all of this possible, from street improvements to wastewater treatment. I am passionate about the environment and resilient communities. I will look for opportunities to transition from an economy driven by cheap fossil fuels to a sustainable economy. I believe we should prioritize our water and soil resources and protect them for a sustainable future. I believe in doing all of this in a fair and equitable manner through proper planning that addresses future needs assessment and finding opportunities to operationalize equity. I will work hard, do my homework, and strive to make policy-level decisions that move Northfield toward a progressive future.
Thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Good morning. I'm Jack Hoschauer. Thanks to the Chamber, to KYMN, and to the Northfield News for having this. I'm running for City Council. Well, let me back up a little bit. I graduated from St. Olaf in 1966, went off to grad school in Hawaii. Didn't really, after Northfield, that was a nice change. Went in the Army in 1968 for 2 years and got out in 1994. I spent 18 years of my 26 years in service in Germany. I retired in Germany, went to work for a German company. I was a journalist and a teacher over there for a while. And as Todd said, I taught German at St. Olaf for a semester, and now I'm an adjunct professor of German at Mankato State. That will probably run out in December, but it's been a good ride so far. I want to represent Second Ward on the City Council because I believe that the City Council spends relatively a lot of time talking and for the amount of work they get done. And as an example, a couple of weeks ago there was a big discussion about connecting the trails run by Department of Natural Resources to a path through the city, and it was discussed whether they should go through Carleton or some other way. And there was a 20-minute discussion about whether the Planning Commission should do this, and then there was another 20 minutes about what the Planning Commission should do. I think you should say, this is what we want to do, go look at it, and if you come up with something different, come tell us.
Thank you. Mr. Ness, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
I'm Brad Ness. I would also like to thank KYMN and the Northfield News for sponsoring these forums, and Todd and his staff at the Northfield Chamber for putting these all together. I am Brad Ness, lifelong member of Northfield, graduate of Northfield High School, graduate of St. Olaf College. My most recent board that I was on was the Convention and Visitors Bureau for 7 or 8 years, and we tried to attract individuals to this town. I think the City Council can take one additional step and do everything in their power to attract businesses to this town. Roadblocks should not be put up that discourage businesses from even looking at Northfield, and I'd like to see that change. One of the big reasons I'm running for council is I think the council needs decorum. There is differences of opinion, but it should not be something that is publicly shaming people at a meeting. Robert's Rule of Order should be adhered to in all instances, and it kind of tells you how to run a meeting in a respectful manner. Also, consideration needs to be given to the boards and commissions in this town when they come forward with a proposal, instead of looking at it, throwing it out, and doing what the council would like to see done. If the council wants a board or commission to come forward with a certain issue, give that commission or board guidelines, but don't dictate to them. The city needs to figure out how to attract businesses to lower the property tax burden in this town. There's a lot of tax-free, and I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, 2 minutes for your opening remarks.
Okay, I've lived in Northfield and worked in Northfield for 20 years now, 20 years this year. This council, like all previous councils, have been accused of being, to a greater or lesser extent, dysfunctional. This is natural. Usually this means that we disagree with the decisions they make. This too is natural. To the extent that this is true, it is because the council as a whole has allowed itself to be sidetracked by individual and even collective petty obsessions, distractions, and firmly held yet totally unproductive principles and worldviews. The council is a decision-making body, and good decisions must be based on reason, rational debate, and must always be fiscally responsible. Before a good decision can be made, individual preconceived notions and prejudicial worldviews must be set aside, and the council as a whole must have access to solid information and sound data. Without these tools, all one has to offer is just another opinion, all too often emotionally based and therefore simply wrong. Such obsessions, increasingly strident and anathema to civil debate, include gender, race, climate change, sustainability, and these have transformed from being important considerations to constraints, and now they almost determine the outcome. The list gets longer year after year. Where you see diversity, I see division and distraction, and in this regard I declare myself a nonconformist. But all of these concerns pale into insignificance when set against the biggest issue facing our nation and Northfield today, an issue that all debate depends on, and that is freedom of speech, without which we can address and resolve nothing. And currently, everywhere, it is being suppressed.
Thank you.
All right, first question. We'll start with Ms. Weifel. What private sector experience do you have that you believe will assist you as a counselor? And again, everyone has 90 seconds.
Thank you. Well, I've worked, I guess my biggest one would be the assistant director of the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, where there I have a role very similar to Mr. Martig's with the council, where I'm working with a board and they're making decisions about the organization. So I find that really helpful in my council work, because I think about what direction does staff need, how can I make the direction clear, and what resources and research does the council need to make that decision. So it's really helpful for me, I think, to work the flip side of the equation in my private sector life, in the business life. And then working for Carleton College is very helpful. They have a number of resources. They have a grant office where I partner with, and there have been a lot of helpful opportunities for training through that institution. So I would just cite my leadership in my previous employment and how that impacts my work on the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, what private sector experience do you have that you believe will assist you as a counselor?
Well, I'm not sure you'd call it private experience, but I was an Army officer for 26 years. In that time, I learned to identify and analyze problems, make sensible recommendations to the boss, and also to live with the decisions that didn't go my way. and nevertheless support them. And here in Northfield, I was on the EDA and the president of the EDA for 5 years. I learned a lot about Northfield, and hopefully I did some good as far as bringing new business and economic development to the city. I think that's actually helped me look at the council as a decision-making body, which, as I see it, its task is to make decisions and give broad guidance and let the staff do its job.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ness, do you need me to repeat the question?
I do not.
All right.
I have been on quite a few boards in my 60 years here in Northfield. President of my church, I was in charge of Defeated Jesse James Days on 2 separate occasions. I'm currently on a committee with the Minnesota State High School League involving all officials in the state, and the Minnesota Swim Officials Association. I'm a representative to that board. Probably the most recent one was 7 years spent as chairman of the Convention and Visitors Bureau I previously mentioned, which gave me good experience on what Northfield needs to do individually, as I mentioned before. And I would really like to see the council take that step and find a way to attract businesses to Northfield.
All right, thank you. Mr. Butler, do you need me to repeat the question?
Yeah, please.
Okay. What private sector experience do you have that you believe will assist you as a counselor?
Well, it's in the realm of decision making. I'm often approached to make a decision, and the temptation always is to make a quick decision. In fact, the pressure is on me to make a quick decision, and yet, over time, I've allowed myself to stand back and think about it. And I think that's one of the things that I can bring to the table, is the ability to stand back and think about and analyse and check the data and look for better and more information, and just to reflect on what's at stake. And the other one is difficult decisions are often have to be made, and I always think that it's not about me, it's about the business. And the businesses are always harsh mistresses, and they expect quality in decision making, and therefore again I refer to the entity that I'm working for. In this case, it would be the council, and it's not about me or my prejudices or anything else. It's about me working in the best interests of the community.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Colby, the same question to you.
Thank you. Well, it's such a broad question. Let's try this. 4.5 years of active duty in the Air Force as a military attorney, 17 years in the Air Force Reserve. After I served on the city council for 3 years from, I believe, 95 to 97, I was so fascinated by the subject of public administration that I went and got a master's degree in it from Mankato State. I am genuinely fascinated in government, especially local government. It is a passion, and I think I probably talk about government and politics every day. But the other areas I've been involved in, I'm on board for the Vintage Band Festival. I've been on various church boards at my church. I was on the Rice County Government Study Commission back in the 80s. My recollection is that I was involved in the Northfield Historical Society for a period of time. But the biggest private experience that I had was practicing law in Lundblad Law Office for 2 years, and then having my own office here in town for about 10 years. Meeting, payroll, cash flow issues. It was a great experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next question. 90 seconds to answer the following question. We'll start with Mr. Hoschauer. What is the role of local government in attracting new businesses to Northfield and supporting current Northfield businesses?
Local government is the primary task of attracting new business through making life easy for them, as easy as possible. That means as far as the council is concerned, and the Economic Development Authority, providing the conditions for businesses to get set up and get moving as fast as possible. This has not always been the case here in Northfield, as some businesses have gone to the Planning Commission, to ED, and to the council several times before they got through, and that's one thing. Another thing that needs to happen as far as business is concerned is to find some space for businesses to actually set up here in Northfield. Northfield's very limited on the amount of space in the city limits that we've got, and which is a big constraint on the ability or the kind of business that can come here to Northfield.
Mr. Ness, same question.
I think the most important thing is the city needs to remove roadblocks. There has been mention, and quite a few businesses looked at Northfield and just said, oh, there's too many hurdles to cross. We're going to try and look elsewhere. And it has changed for the positive within the last year or so, but I think there's more that can be done. One of the big steps I think is important is there's a new EDA person starting on staff in December. I think that is a very positive move for the city, to get somebody in-house to look at what can be done for the economic development of Northfield. The business park is taking a step forward. There's been talk about the land out by the hospital that has been was enacted or put into the city in, I believe, 2008, and they're finally going to move on that. So there is some positive things happening, but I think more can be done along those lines to attract businesses to Northfield.
Okay, Mr. Butler, I'll repeat the question. What is the role of local government in attracting new businesses to Northfield and supporting current Northfield businesses?
We need not try to seduce big business to come here, for they will come in their own time to what they and we know to be one of the finest cities in the known universe. It's the entrepreneur. I argue for them. It's these people we should be encouraging to come to Northfield. Granted, it carries higher risks, but the rewards far outweigh the risks. Local business is the heart and soul of the economy, the local economy, and indeed social development. I thank Mayor Bill Rossman for enabling me to build the cow. After Bill, in the mid to the late noughties, there existed in City Hall a mindset that said, the answer's no. Now what's the question? I think that depressing period is over. And I look forward to City Hall saying, and continuing to say, yes, how can we help you achieve your entrepreneurial dream?
Thank you. Mr. Colby?
Yeah, thank you. Northfield is built on a tripod economically. We have the industrial area, we have South Highway 3, commercial district, and then we have the downtown. Starting with the industrial area, I think we're doing fairly well. Attracting someone would be nice. But St. Olaf is our largest employer, according to the data I have. Multimeal Post is second, Carleton, then the Independent School District, Maltec, and McLean. They've been here for well over 20 years. We are obviously doing something right by them. Commercially, the development of South Highway 3 continues fairly well. Downtown, I don't think there are very many shops available at street level. So we are having some success. So how we help them? Well, first of all, we need to always listen. That's number one. But we do have the structures in place to deal with them and to attract business in the NDDC, the EDA, and the new staff person. As to removing roadblocks, you'd have to identify the specific roadblock that you're talking about for me to address that. But I think our approach has been good. Certainly there are things we could improve upon. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zweifel, what is the role of local government in attracting new businesses to Northfield and supporting current Northfield businesses?
Yes, thank you. I would continue to prioritize infrastructure. Previous councils had canceled road projects to save money. I would not do that. I would continue to prioritize infrastructure that's needed for business. I would continue to prioritize essential services, our fire, police, those essential services, all doing that while maintaining our vibrant small town quality. And adding to that, it looks like there is a role potentially for the council with the facilitation of our economic partners working together. They're currently not working together, and so maybe there's a role there for some facilitation of our partners working together. I have here today, I brought with me the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan. It's a very good plan. It has some great strategies in it, and opportunity number one is diversifying the economic base. And I'll just quote from the plan: make land available for business, concentrate on the needs of existing businesses, implement a targeted industry recruitment strategy, raise awareness of the Northfield in the region, and explore options for leveraging existing fiber networks. So if we can get the council and our economic partners working together to implement that strategy, I think we'll be, in addition to the infrastructure, the essential services, and maintaining our vibrant small town. It's quite complex, but I think if we can get that together, we'll be good.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to question number 3. Remember, each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer the following question. We'll start with you, Mr. Ness. What are your local transportation priorities?
I think Northfield has taken some steps in the past to get transportation accomplished. I think they're doing a good job on street maintenance. I think that has, sometimes people say gets overlooked and put off, but I think, the streets are being maintained to where they should be. The highways, obviously, the state has the say pretty much in what happens with those. Public transportation could probably use a little boost. There has been, with Hiawatha Land for the last couple of years, I think that may improve. I've not been able to use that ever, but I think overall transportation in the town is on a pretty good foot.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, what are your local transportation priorities?
Well, I like the idea of the Dan Patch rail link to the cities in Rochester, and I think we do everything we can to encourage that to happen one day. And I generally think in terms of transportation as local, as public, as well as, not just transportation, but also parking comes into this. And I've always liked the idea of exploring the idea of park and ride, particularly for busy events, when you can't find a parking place for love nor money. But above and beyond that, really, I'm not particularly au fait with the transportation system.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, what are your local transportation priorities?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think we have to dig into the comp plan. If it's not up to speed, then we need to update it. I was on the Planning Commission when that was adopted, as I recall, back, no, that was the 2000 plan, I'm sorry. It was updated in 2008. First of all, we need to establish, if we already haven't got it, a committee that's regional. We fit into a regional pattern of roads, and we have to be working with our neighbors, talking about what works for them, what do they need, and how does it fit into our needs. Second, we've got to regionalize our bike trails. They are part of a more recreational than transportational, but for some people they are transportational. One of the problems that the judicial system is talking about is how do you get people to courthouses in southeastern Minnesota? That is a transportation issue. Third, rail, as Mr. Butler was talking about. Rail connects us to Rochester and the Twin Cities. We need to take as many steps as possible to see if we can fit into that, because the development is going to follow those rails. All you got to do is go up to St. Paul, look at the development around the light rail system. It's extraordinary. Development will come with rail, and we need to pursue it. So roads, bike trails, rails. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weifel, what are your local transportation priorities?
Thank you. Well, I'm quite proud of the work that we have done with roads within the city, the street maintenance and the road projects that we've taken on. We did some extra work to make sure that we could get Second Street done in one season, and we got that accomplished. I'll mention in the regional aspect, partnering with the county and with MnDOT. Within the city limits, we have streets and roads that run through that are owned by some of our partners. So especially right now, the county is looking at County Road 1. We've been invited to those meetings. I believe the Planning Commission is discussing that this Thursday evening. How does that, and that is right on our expansion border. So looking regionally, working with our partners, working with MnDOT. We recently worked with MnDOT to get the crossings across Highway 3, the pedestrian crossings. I'm very interested in walkability and bikeability. We know that millennials are driving less, and that they are really interested in living somewhere where they can walk and bike and get around with their families. We also know that our age demographic is changing, and as we age, we're going to have a higher senior population, and they will be driving less as well. So that makes me think about, again, walkability, bikeability, but transit and the transit options that we have for seniors. And I'm definitely in favor of rail and the Dan Patch line and anything that we can move forward on that front. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, what are your local transportation priorities?
Well, at risk of sounding like I'm preaching to the choir, I agree on the issue of rail. When I was a student at St. Olaf, you could take a train to the Twin Cities from here and get back. Beyond that, Northfield is in a spot between 35 and Highway 52, and the connections to those two major arteries, I think, need to be built out. We could get with the county and MnDOT to see if we can widen Highway 19 and also the connection over to 52. Inside of, or within the city limits, I think we need to improve access to the northwest side of the housing area up there by Viking Court, because those people have got really no good way to get into town to do their shopping and other things. So I think that would really be a help to our Northfielders who live up there, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Mr. Butler, we'll start with you. Do you support the continued funding of the NDDC?
No. It's been around now for, 15 years? It did good work when Ross Courier was at the helm. I do remember the food thing on Bridge Square and a variety of other things. I've not seen anything at all since he left. I listened carefully to the meeting. I was actually attending the meeting when it was discussed in council. And, as I've said, I think on air, there was rational argument, there was evidence presented, and it was defeated. And the rational argument and the reasoning said, no, we can no longer continue funding this body. And then there was another side to it saying, well, isn't it nice to have someone who thinks about the downtown? Well, that's the Chamber's job, and our job, or at least the council's job as a whole in the EDA. I think the money could be spent better. So, no, I do not, and I do not support the funding for the NDDC.
All right, thank you. Mr. Colby, same question to you.
As I said it in my first comments, the downtown is the centerpiece of our community. The NDDC is its advocate. Yes, I support its funding.
All right, thank you. Ms. Weifel, do you support the continued funding of the NDDC?
Thank you. So I would just, we know that great downtowns don't happen by accident, and that it's not an accident that we have such a great downtown. And it's been through the efforts of many people throughout the years to protect that resource and that historic downtown, the creation of the historic downtown area. We have won awards for the downtown. We know that visitors come here for the downtown. My parents were just in town this weekend and were raving about the downtown winter walk, one of our most popular events, and the defeat of Jesse James Days happened downtown. So I would like to see our partners working together. I do think there's a role for a partner that specifically works for downtown. I'm interested, so I do support the funding, but I am interested in, they're in transition, and so it's a difficult time because I want to see their work plan. I want Ben Martig to have that discussion with the board and to see where are they going with this hire. The chamber went through a similar situation, and we supported that transition. So I'm supporting the transition that the NDDC is currently undergoing. I would like to see what they bring forward as a work plan. But in principle, I support the NDDC.
All right, thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, same question.
I think the idea behind the NDDC is an excellent one to focus on our downtown. However, I agree with Ms. Weifel and the fact that right now the NDDC is undergoing a transition. And so I would tend to withhold a firm decision on this. And the council, I think, is discussing perhaps reducing funding for a while until we see what happens. But I would say I would be in favor of withholding funding for the time being until we see how this comes out. Ms. Weifel mentioned a work plan. I'd like to see what it is they plan to do. When I was on the EDA, I sat in on several NDDC meetings, and to be honest, I wasn't particularly impressed with what they were doing. So they're well-meaning people. And they've got the interests of Northfield at heart, but I don't think they were operating effectively, and I'd like to see a little bit more effective action before I would support them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hoschauer. Mr. Ness, same question.
I think they once had a very strong purpose, when they were first organized, and the money was probably well spent. The city has now evolved, and again, hiring a new EDA coordinator, if I'm saying that position right, starting in December. I think that takes the burden off other organizations and puts it back into city staff and the council. And before an organization gets money from the city, I think they need to come forth with a proposal and a presentation to the council on absolute specifics on what they have done to earn that money. Instead of just throwing the money at them, they should say, here's what we did, here's what we accomplished, here's what we brought the city in terms of economic development.
All right, thank you.
Okay, 90 seconds for the next question. We'll start with Mr. Colby. What are your thoughts on transparency of relationships of council members with organizations and those running them requesting funding?
Well, you have to have transparency in government, number one. I mean, that's a fundamental principle. The question is how much. I've had discussions with people for a number of years about how the city council has worked with its various members and various organizations. When money is involved, you have to have transparency. Who's getting what? Where is it coming from? What are the, if any, expectations in response? I mean, you get these complaints about lobbyists too. I suppose there's a specific complaint that somebody has about somebody in government in the city that they've worked with an organization, but for the life of me, I can't recall what it might be. But I do think sometimes, and this is one of those issues where we really, really get carried away with this, and it revolves around the issue of trust. What do you need to trust people who are in government? Do you have to have complete disclosures at all times? And in this day and age, the answer, of course, is yes. But I do think there's real value for city council members to really be blunt with each other and not have it all over the papers and the media. If I want to tell somebody to stick it in their ear, like I did when I was in court, I think there can be value in that. You vent, you get it done with, you move on. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Weifel, what are your thoughts on transparency of relationships between council members with organizations and those running them requesting funding?
Thank you. Well, I think this question is again really about the NDDC, and so at least my perspective on it. So I was questioned about my relationship with the former director, Scott Covey, and so I'll outline that as I did when Terry emailed me about this question as it unfolded. So in 2008, Scott Covey designed my lawn signs, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm an environmentalist, so I designed the signs to be evergreen, so they just have my name and they say City Council. So my thought was, if I continued in this role of serving the community, that I would reuse the signs, and as I have done, I've used those signs since 2008. And that was 6 years before Mr. Covey was the director of the NDDC. And the council gives the funding to the NDDC and not to the executive director. The NDDC hires the executive director. So it truly never even occurred to me to disclose that 8 years, or now six years prior to Mr. Covey being the director of the NDD, that there might be some issue of transparency there. But since it has come up, that I just wanted to outline my relationship with Mr. Covey and how it applies, I feel, to the issue of transparency. Thank you.
Mr. Hoschauer, what are your thoughts on transparency of relationships between council members with organizations and those running them requesting funding?
Well, we have to look at funding from the city coffers in a way as an investment. And an organization who asks for money has got to explain clearly what they want it for, what projects or improvements or whatever they intend to do with the money. And then I would expect them to come back after a certain time and tell us what they did and how they did it, and what the benefit to the city has been from what it is they've done. So they've got to be able to come up with responsible information about what it is they've done with the taxpayers' money. And comment on Ms. Weifel's lawn signs, it is absolutely ludicrous to hold somebody responsible today for something that happened in a completely different context years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Ness.
I think it's vitally important to have transparency. If there's a conflict of interest involved, I think that ought to be brought first out of the block, what the conflict is. And if you're not comfortable with voting, abstain from that vote. I was at a League of Minnesota Cities meeting, and I asked the conflict of interest attorney if I would have a conflict because my wife worked at the city library. I found out absolutely not, but that conflict may not exist because she's retiring in January. So,
Mr. Butler, what are your thoughts on transparency of relationships between council members with organizations and those running them requesting funding?
Well, almost all council decisions involve money. And experience tells me it's the easiest thing in the world to spend other people's money. And in this regard, transparency is easily achieved. All organisations, the city council, the city itself, all have accounts, financial testimonies to how they're doing, what they're doing. And every year I suggest that the income and expenditure account for the city as a whole, for each of its organisations, the library, the police force, the fire service, the liquor store, all of these accounts should be available online, and even perhaps a full page of Northfield News every year. In this way, people can become familiar and become educate themselves in how how their money is being spent. To me, this is the obvious solution to at least the financial side of transparency.
Thank you.
Okay, remember each. I'm sorry, I did it myself. Remember, each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer the following question. Ms. Weifel, we'll start with you. Do you feel the city financial information and budget forecasts have been adequate? What changes, if any, would you recommend to make it easier for the general public to access and understand?
Thank you. I was thinking about this question. You asked it at the mayoral forum, and it might be in one of our questions too. I've been looking at the reports for 8 years in this fashion, so I'm used to looking at them that way, and I like numbers. I'm good at math. So, but I've been hearing the concerns about how it looks, how the numbers are presented to the public, and what we can do about that. And I do think we can make great strides in that area of presenting the information more frequently, presenting it in different forms. As I've tutored students in math and worked with elementary students in challenge math, I've found that the more ways you can present mathematical information and numbers, the more people can understand it. We all take in information differently and process information differently, so I do like the idea of presenting it in more than one format. That said, the city, it will take a little time to get there, because I understand the software we currently have will make it difficult to present the information in that fashion. So we'd be looking at a software update, and that's going to increase that would need to get in the budget. So, but I would be in favor of that software increase to make the output of that financial information easily accessible.
Thank you. Mr. Hoschauer, do you feel the city financial information and budget forecast have been adequate? What changes, if any, would you recommend to make it easier for the general public to access and understand?
Well, first of all, I believe the information we get that's available is adequate. On the other hand, when I look at those long columns of numbers, I tend to stare into space and sort of zone out. Does the average person care what's in line 34 of column 5? Probably not. What the average person needs to know is how much money we have, how it's being spent, and how we are with the budget. That can be done with a fairly simple series of line charts. Here's the budget. Here's where we are. And if they need to know more, they can go on the website and look in the software and get the detail.
Thank you. Mr. Ness, do you feel the city financial information and budget forecasts have been adequate? What changes, if any, would you recommend to make it easier for the general public to access and understand?
I believe that information is adequate. Government financing is a complex animal, and unless you are in the finance office, you may not understand every line of it. I think the public has to make an effort to dig into that information. You know, a little bit of the onus is on each person. If they want more information, that can be attained. If they want less information, I think it's there. They just have to pick out the parts that they don't want to see and pick the parts that they do want to see. So that's why I believe that what is available to the public is adequate.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, do you feel the city financial information and budget forecast have been adequate? What changes, if any, would you recommend to make it easier for the general public to access and understand?
Well, I think I answered that in the last question, that the accounts should be published. I mean, they use QuickBooks. If anybody's interested in finance and bookkeeping, then they should have access to them. And if it's a long spreadsheet, they can compress it. I mean, QuickBooks does all that for you. However, other people, are not particularly concerned. But for those who are concerned, as I say, they should be published and easily accessible. Then people can get together around a table and sort them out. As for budgets, budgets are always predicated on anticipated spending, and it's those line items that should be scrutinised. I remember asking the head of finance, what are the city's assets and liabilities and what form do they take? Gold, debt, silver bars. He hadn't got a clue. He's the head of the finance committee. If he doesn't know, what chance have we got of knowing? So there's a lot to do, and these things are accessible to the finance department, and they are publishable online and in the newspaper.
Thank you. Mr. Colby, do you feel the city financial information and budget forecast have been adequate? What changes, if any, would you recommend to make it easier for the general public to access and understand?
I don't think I can add a great deal to what Ms. Weifel said. I went online in the last week and I looked at the city's budget, and they had a wonderful pie chart explaining where most of the money goes for the city. Public safety gets roughly 37%, public works 21%, culture and recreation 20%. I am not a math person, and I was grateful for that pie chart. So if the city could keep using alternative means of explaining, that would be appreciated. Working through raw numbers can be a grind. Thank you.
Can I add anything? Can I add anything?
You can add it on the next question if you want to.
And the next question is, we'll start with Mr. Hoschauer. What should the city's capital improvement projects list be, and how would you rank items like a new ice arena and liquor store in that priority list?
I think capital improvement has to do a lot with infrastructure, but items such as the ice arena and the liquor store. The liquor store, I think, should, let me say, I would support the moving the liquor store to the Econo Foods area. That makes a kind of a shopping district, if you will, and I think would help the development of that area. As far as the ice arena is concerned, my own experience with the ice arena is virtually zero, so I could say it's a nice amenity for the city, but I can't really say from my own knowledge whether it's would be a paying action to put a lot of money into it at this point. I understand there's some talk about making it winter, summer ice, but it costs a lot of money to figure out if the ground is going to support that, and I think that needs to be looked at. But right now, I cannot prioritize that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Ness, what should the city's capital improvement projects list be, and how would you rank items like the liquor store and ice arena?
Up until a few years ago, I was opposed to an ice arena completely until the CVB had a presentation by the local hockey association saying, here's what could happen in this town, attract this many people, and they had some specifics on offering tournaments and that sort of thing. So I think an ice arena should make the list. Exactly where on the list, not sure, but attracting people to this town, using the hotel rooms, using the restaurants, it could be an economic boon to this town to have to have an ice arena. Liquor store, not so sure. I would like to see the exact numbers of the net profit they always put that the liquor store generates a fair amount of money, $300,000 to the city budget, to the city general fund. And I guess if I dug into the numbers, like we talked about the budget stuff, I probably could get the net number, but I'd like to see what that number is. And I know liquor stores generate a lot of money when they're new and shiny and pretty, and so it would make the list. And exactly where, again, not sure.
All right, thank you. Mr. Butler, the same question to you.
Neither the liquor store nor the ice arena are priorities, though both are desirable in terms of economic development. The job of the council is not to provide, but to enable, which requires a different mindset and approach. That said, and notwithstanding the profit it generates, I do believe that our city should get out of the liquor store business and leave it to the private sector. When it comes to capital improvement, I look at safety and security. These trump all other considerations. For example, the recently frequently occurring 100-year flood. And I think Dana did a good job. First, declare an emergency. Second, get out the sandbags and the volunteers. Third, keep your fingers crossed. Next, plan to raise the transformers and build the walls, and get St. Olaf and Carlton to pay for them. But to my mind, and longer term, remove the dam, dredge the river, which, by the way, will allow the free passage of fish and kayaks for the first time in over 100 years. A wonderful prospect.
All right, thank you. Mr. Colby, same question.
Thank you. Well, you got to have a city improvement plan, capital improvement plan. You have to have the council identify the projects that have to be tackled, and it's a group process. The group has got to figure it out. One of the things we have to keep in mind is that real estate taxes do not provide all of the revenue on which the city operates. It just doesn't. There are lots of other things. There are fees. There are fines that pay for it. There are services that the city provides that have to be paid for, that are paid for. The liquor store does provide some